Hey everyone, Selwyn here from Wynn, bringing you week 10 of the Average to Savage training program written by Greg Nuckols over at strongerbyscience.com. Like usual, I'll leave links below in the description so you can check out the program as well as the Stronger by Science website. Both amazing resources. I highly recommend checking them out. So week 10 is the third week of the second phase. If you've been following along, we've introduced some new movements, brought back some movements that I haven't done in quite a while. So in week 10, we actually had a bit of a break midweek just because there was the Grow With Video live conference just to help with some YouTube self-development, things like that. So that kind of took up about 3 to 4 days out of my training, which meant I spread out 1 week of training over the course of around 1.5 weeks rather than taking that 3 days in the 5-week cycle. We actually spread that 3 days over a 7-day, over a 10-day cycle. So a little bit of week and a half with some extra rest periods in between, obviously, and I think that helped me with some of the progression that I experienced this week. Maybe it is following on the trend from previous 2 weeks. So it will be interesting to see how my training progresses in week 11, just because we did have this extra rest for week 10. I'm wondering if I'm able to recover better, and then if that recovery is going to transfer through to next week when we compress that training cycle back to a regular workload. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on that episode to see how my progress either continues or stalls out depending on what happens there. But it does illustrate a point that I'd like to make is that life is going to happen. We're going to interfere with training, and honestly, if you're not getting paid to work out, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, just because it doesn't matter. If your living doesn't revolve around training, like you're not getting paid professionally to do this, then 3 days delay in your training program isn't going to mean a lot. If you're training for the Olympics and this is 3 days out for the Olympics, probably going to have a pretty big of a problem there. But just remember to keep everything in perspective. And these are the 3 options that I think you have. These are 3 options that I see when life gets in the way and you either have a planned or an unplanned event pop up. Ideally, the first way is that you've planned around it and you schedule in a deload week, so that ramping up to the event, we don't have to worry about whether or not this is going to affect training because we've taken the week off and we don't have to worry about it. Obviously, that's for a planned occasion. The following 3 will be a bit more for some unplanned events. First would be to do what I did and just continue training as normal after the couple of days off. Again, it probably holds for like a week or 2 max. If you're missing out on a month of training, you probably have to do something different. But if it is a couple of days, just continue on with the training cycle and pretend as if nothing ever happened. Second option is to repeat the current week that you're on in the week that you're able to resume regular programming or regular training. So for example, this week, week 10, I spaced that over 1.5 weeks. Instead of doing week 11's programming next week, I would just repeat week 10 and then just continue on from there as normal. That's one way to progress if the certain training program you have builds very much on the previous weeks and you don't want to miss out on those gains and progress. Otherwise, individual preferences. If you have that personality and you want to just redo the week properly, then by all means do that. The final option is not something I would recommend, and that's to cram in the workouts into the remaining days of the week. So if I come back and it's a Wednesday and I have 2 more days left, so Thursday, Friday, I would eliminate any rest days and just do 2 back-to-back sessions. And then even if that happened to mean I had more days left over for the end of the week and I would just have no days off and then just cram in the rest of that workload, you can fit in the rest of the week by really compressing down those workouts. Again, not something I'd recommend just because now you're overstressing the body and putting too much stress in a shorter amount of time than the program would allow you for, because the programs are written with certain recovery time frames in mind and progressions in mind. So remember, it's not about today's workout, it's about the workouts you have over the course of the year, and is what you're doing today building up, not just for tomorrow, but for next month. Because if we destroy ourselves with 4 days of work in 3 days, that's going to have some significant effects in the next week of training where you might not make as much progress as you would have if you just trained as usual and not have to try and over recover from this excessive workload that you just did. And that is speaking from some personal experience where I have tried to do that catch up mentality. I've even tried to do 2 a days in order to catch up, cram like 5 days of work into 3 days worth of calendar days, and it just really doesn't work out. Looking back in hindsight, not a great thing to do, just because I do feel super fatigued that next week, and that progress is definitely stalled out that following week, just because you were coming in, you weren't even coming in at 0, you were coming in at like -10 energy, and you weren't able to build upon anything. So, and that just follows through even a little bit more to the second week after that. So you're really shooting yourself in the foot by trying to cram in too much in too little of a time. So with that being said, just use your own judgment when you do come to your own training and you do miss a couple of days. It's not the end of the world. Life's going to happen, and provided you're not a professional athlete, it's probably not going to matter at all. So what I'll do right now is throw over to some training highlights over the course of the week. So after some research about the high bar versus low bar back squat, you can find out what I found in my recent Q&A video, which I'll link up in the corner here. I have been making the switch from low bar squatting over to high bar back squatting, or at least trying to, not only because I think in the long term it'll be better for my squat development, but I'm hoping it should help alleviate some of that shoulder pain that typically flares up with my usual low bar squat barbell positioning on the lower part of the delts there. The SS Yoke bar training has been paying off with a much more consistent back angle during the ascent of the squat. You'll notice that my hips don't shoot up too much faster than my shoulders until that last couple of reps when fatigue is starting to kick in, and you'll see the knees slide back just a little bit and those hips rise up faster than the back. But because the earlier set, I think the upper back angle is staying nice and similar, which is a good thing from that SS Yoke training. Moving on to the overhead press, I think it's going well. We matched load and volume prescriptions for this week. There is still a fair amount of hip movement and shifting, but I think I'm getting better at grinding through the reps with the overhead press, and working through that sticking point that typically occurs right above the forehead. One technical area you'll notice is that my head doesn't pop forward at the right time. There's definitely a delay once the barbell clears my head and my head shooting forward. Ideally, once that barbell passes above the forehead, you stick that head through the window and move everything forward, just so you get more in line with under that barbell and get a more efficient bar path, allowing you to press that weight up. Moving on to some front squats now. Really happy with how the front squats are progressing, especially after last week's misreading of the weight prescriptions. We upped the weights by a lot mistakenly, but we were still able to keep up this week, which is kind of awesome. The Olympic style front rack position is staying solid and comfortable as well. One cue that has helped me keep the front rack well is to drive the elbows out wide during the ascent. I've also been playing around with stance with the foot angle. This week was a hip width foot placement and slightly less than 45 degrees of foot angle. I found that to be most comfortable. From a range of motion perspective, I personally enjoy the full range of motion where my thighs touch my calves. I get a much better rebound at the bottom, and it does feel less aggravating on my knees as a whole movement there. You'll also notice that I did forget to roll those knee sleeves back up there. It's an overall detriment there. Moving on now to the incline bench press. Again, the only horizontal bench press I'll be doing for the next 6 weeks. Here I am, incline bench pressing the same weight that I'm front squatting with. So there's that strength differential. 3 weeks into the new movements, and no real shoulder pain has been appearing, which is great. The incline bench is progressing nicely, kind of keeping up with that front squat, which is kind of cool. Keeping up with all the load and volume recommendations from the program. Here we have some farmer carries for the week. To mitigate load, I went for distance this week, so instead of one trip up and down and then resetting, my goal was to make 2 unbroken laps, which I was able to get once. Grip here is a huge limiting factor and something I need to place some extra work and focus on. These are only 95 pounds per hand, but my grip is so much more fatigued than the rest of my body, especially with that extra distance component thrown in there. If we're going up and down once, not really an issue, but once we get past that second lap, and that just comes down to exposure to the movement. And we're also working with that rotation from the spin at the ends of the track is something I need to work on, getting that rotational movement control down. Controlling that weight and having momentum work for me rather than against me is something that definitely takes a practice and skill to get through. And here we have some lunges with the SS Yoke barbell. Again, doing the static lunge over this phase just to regulate some knee stress. Since there's no impact from having that longer step,
It definitely helps with the balance and range of motion consistency. Another new movement for this phase has been the single arm T-bar rows, one of the few direct upper back movements I've thrown into this phase. Being as an accessory, I did opt for the unilateral version to mitigate stress on my back. Using the single arm means that I'm using significantly less loads than I could if I was using two hands, but still getting that stimulus on the back there. And here we have some Atlas stone picks wrapping up the week. The goal was to really just break the stone off of the floor and rep that out, trying to work on that technique off the floor by getting in some more volume, also increasing my speed between the reps. Not having a platform to load the stones makes stone training a little less than ideal without that consistent place to pick that up to. But we're currently working with a 185-pound stone here. Next week, we'll try to introduce that 215 stone for some pick practice again. Nothing really to note technically wise, since I am still learning the movement. One thing I did do is take the neoprene sleeves off for the last set, which did make the pick a lot easier, but I did scrape away a couple of skin cells in the process.
So that'll wrap up week 10, a couple of new movements there just because we had some extra time. And again, not wanting to overload the week with extra movements, we just threw in a couple of extras that I saw fit as time allowed. So that'll wrap up the 10th week of training. The third week into the current phase. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on my final overall rating and review of the Average to Savage 2.0 training program. This has been Selwyn from Wynn Strength, and remember, a better life through strength. Average.